Well, we're welcoming back an old friend of the show and of the Isle of Man, a man who's got his own ideas on what to be done. Peter Karran with the Liberal Van Still.
Yes.
The founder, of course.
Yeah.
I know you got in touch to talk about the mortgage, the government mortgage situation. So let's start with that. And I'm sure we've got lots of other things to talk about. I mean, this is something that we used to have, right? Did it go away?
What I'm worried about is that we're going to have a repeat of what nearly happened 40 years ago. And that is when the interest rates went up. Fortunately, we lobbied hard with the likes of Dr. Moore to keep the interest rates on the government mortgage scheme, which was virtually the vast majority of mortgages on the island.
Because rates were like, what, how much at the time?
They went up to 15.5%.
Yeah. Wow.
Now, the point is the difference then, we were talking in 10, 20,000 pounds
mortgages.
£1,000. Today, this is going to decimate if we're not careful. Fortunately, we managed to get common sense to prevail. Admittedly, I was the nearest thing to the Antichrist to Dr. Moore at the time, because, of course, it was so important. There's so many pensioners out there now that would have had to throw the keys in. And what we need now is government to start looking after the poor and the vulnerable in our society. Now, if it was a piece of legislation for a bank, it can be thrown in at a moment's notice. Here we have something that is a social cancer. We've seen what's happened before, and we need to be looking at an issue of reintroducing the government mortgage scheme.
So you're saying you'd like the government to step in and be the Isle of Man's mortgage lender for people on certain criteria? Yeah, well,
what happened was, I mean, we had the Usury Act. We got rid of the Usury Act in 1985. That was one of the reasons why it was so difficult to get building societies to be able to work and operate on the island. The issue is that we've already got this false situation. We've seen deluded ex-chief ministers saying how the housing lists have gone down. They've only gone down because of the fact there's an artificial low level for criteria to be able to A, get in a local authority house, and B, to be able to get on the first time mortgage. Now, this needs to be done sooner rather than later. And I hope that what we're going to see is somebody in government being prepared to initiate this sort of initiative.
Has the government got the money to be doing this sort of thing these days?
Well, the situation, the government had the money in them days. And when I first came in, we had £1 million in reserve.
Oh, yeah.
And the fact is that they can find the money when it suits them. If we do not want to end up with a situation where we did, where people ended up throwing the keys back and ended up in poverty and being poor for the rest of their lives, we need to be seeing some proactive government instead of reactive after the situation. These are the core people of our society. These are the people who are going to give the future.
So you don't think supply and demand is going to be the economics on this one?
Well, the simple answer as far as it's the supply and demand, we've told them what to do for 30 years and you're all ridiculed about it. We need to bring into planning restrictions on use and ownership of certain housing.
Well, Chris Thomas even alluded to that himself, a minister that was thinking that the Jersey sort of open and closed market.
For 30 years
you think that's the thing?
Well, we raised it for 30 years with them. Of course, the problem is they're not interested in the ordinary people. They're only interested in the fat cats. You know what I mean? And the problem we've got to do is we've got to get priority back. The cornerstone of our society is the home. A home is not a nest egg, it's a nest. And we need to see at least a quarter of the housing in new planning with restrictions on use. So that means the hedge funds can't buy it. The buy-to-let market can't buy it because you can't buy them houses if you're not an Isle of Man worker. You can't buy them houses if you own a second residential property, and you can't sell and rent them out. That way, they're competing not with old people like me buying them up for an investment opportunity. They're fighting for that house with other people who've got to try and get a mortgage together and everything else.
But I mean, it appears that the younger demographics of the Isle of Man aren't there. I mean, people are leaving. I know many people I know who are leaving.
Well,
is this part of the thing, do you think? Because or attracting people to work in the health services, they can't afford to buy that, therefore they're put off the Isle of Man?
Well, the point is, what we've got to do is we've got to start making the agenda for the nation and its people, not for the freedom to flourish for the few to fleece the rest of us. And that's always been the problem with the crony capitalism on the island, because we don't get the political representation to look after the interests of the ordinary people on the island. We just have to look at the housing crisis for the homeless at the moment, where there's no homeless shelters, so people are taking people in at the moment to try and make sure they're not on the street. But at the end of the day, what we should be seeing is that we should be seeing a statutory requirement by government to have some sort of responsibility for homelessness.
Why is no one taking this up then? Is it just not of interest to any businesses or charities rather?
Well, the problem is it's a cocoon. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a disgrace that it's a lottery trust who have been funded the homeless shelter up to now. It's a disgrace that that we haven't got some sort of statutory obligation. I understand we don't have to follow to the line what's happening in the United Kingdom. But I do think that what we need to do is we need some sort of obligation. Heaven forbid it run by government. I mean, we brought in all the public services, but I'm afraid because of the lack of political audit and accountability and the total lack of control over the senior civil service who seem to be making the strategic policy now, we don't want it run by the public service because we'll be paying champagne prices for brown stout. What we need is the funding for an organisation, a registered charity, to actually get on with this job and let's get a night shelter back on this island.
You used the we there. Are you talking as Lib Van here? Do they have their policies which you're talking about? Or are you talking as an individual?
Well, the policies as far as the planning restrictions and the government mortgage scheme is policy anyways from when I was there. The homelessness isn't a policy of Lib Vam. I think it's a moral issue, and I think it's about time we start catering and having legislation being produced for the benefit of the weak and vulnerable in our society, and not the powerful and rich.
And is it likely to ever get to that stage, though? Because you've been fighting all this for all these years.
Lots of things that I did over the years that were seen as being impossible are now reality. I mean, you've got so many things now that were wasn't things. You've got to remember, when I went into politics, the council of ministers, or the Coleman, that was the situation was with the then predecessor to what we've got now. They promoted the island as scab wages, scab employment. And it's interesting you say about the issue of the young leaving. Well, it's in them days, the young left because there was no jobs. The average working wage in 1986 was 45% of the Brits, unless you had the likes of the Vernon scale from UK teacher scale, or you had UK parity on your pay, you were on less than half what you'd be on in the United Kingdom. Now, we changed all that. You talk about we never changed things. Things have changed. I mean, if we would have said to the people that we get human rights, we get employment legislation, we actually achieve getting a better system than our UK counterparts on the student system for our kids going to. That's all been lost simply because of the lack of accountability in the systems of government. And the problem is we are not getting value for money for what we are paying for.
What do you make to the Rosalind Ranson issues then?
An absolute scandal. And the thing is, fortunately for that lady, she had a husband that was an advocate. She had professional indemnity. What they do is they play poker. We've seen it all before. Remember, I've spent 25 years being the unofficial ombudsman, as well as the factor of what they can get away with. What is lacking at the moment really is it's too much of a club. I'm a big believer in a national government of unity because of the economic situation. But the reality is, one was hung out to dry, as I say.
Harold Bell did the national unity thing. You were in there for a few minutes anyway, weren't you?
Well, the point is, you know, there are a lot of things that we're now seeing which is heartbreaking, the likes of the Manx supplement. The Manx supplement should have been never for people just for 10 years residence in contribution to the island. It should never have been given to people when 20% of them, when 15 years ago, were on more than 40 grand a year. That money should be there for the next generation. It should have been means test at the bottom. We should be able to means test at the top.
I mean, between the pandemic and everything else that's going on in the world, I mean, I believe the Crown deficit here is weighing high now on the Chief Minister, because we haven't got this pot of money from all accounts as it was. Clearly, we've had to raid it, haven't we?
But the problem is they've been deficit spending for the last 4 or 5 years. That is not the way forward.
So do you see the 100,000 population as a way out of this?
Well, the point is, I think the problem is you've got to have the economic engines. And what they've done is destroyed them. Things like we wanted them to bring in the patents office. We've got the capital gains advantage here. What I want them to do, one of the problems with inventors, is being able to defend their invention against competition that try and steal it. Part of a Manx patents office on the island would protect that for an equity stake by the taxpayer. That's the sort of thing that we wanted. We wanted to bring in the bloodless diamonds exchange. There's so many things that they could have done that they didn't do because of the crony capitalism. The fact that they use the state as a weapon against the individual when it doesn't suit them.
Do you see a good future for the island at the minute? Because it seems to be very mixed messaging I'm hearing at the minute.
The biggest issue is we need new economic engines. We need to make sure we
like the cannabis thing, for instance. The cannabis thing for medical. Well, that's being held up a bit, isn't it?
The problem is, you all laughed 20 years ago. It was disgraceful when we didn't legalise cannabis for medical use. And this idea of cornering the market for the few is not the answer. The cannabis should have been legalised for medical use 20 years ago. If I would have had a wife or a husband or a child that needed cannabis to relieve his symptoms, I would be a criminal. And I believe in doing unto others as you want to be done unto yourself.
Okay. To wrap this up, how are you doing? Because we haven't heard from you for ages. You must be the most frustrated person on the side of all this, watching what's playing out with all these ministers in and out of health, for instance, and the sort of, you know, musical chairs that are going on.
The problem you've got to do is you see Britain now with the way the Tories are running Britain. They've run Britain into the ground through a kleptocracy. The Isle of Man was a kleptocracy when I was... To us unposh people, it was a fiefdom, where, you know, crony capitalism, where your face fitted, it's not what you know, it was who you know. All this thing about trade allure, and that was our national state. We need to destroy that and actually have proper enterprise, but not aggressive capitalism, where we create the abusive monopolies, which, to be honest with you, government has been one of the biggest culprits of abusive monopolies. I mean, and we need to start getting value for money and real transparency on how they're dealing with things.
So really, again, how are you keeping out of all this? I mean, would you take a position, MLC position, like a couple coming up next year?
Listen, I told you I would be an MLC. There's no chance.
I'm teasing. I know that wouldn't happen.
I mean,
but what about politics?
The problem is we need the institution. We need party politics.
You need to be in the tent to change this, right? And you're the man or one of the men who want to change things. Yet you need to have some control. Surely you must miss all this in a weird way, right?
I miss the job for the benefit of being able to help others. Yeah. I don't miss the company. Most of them I had very little regard for, and they knew it. And, you know, as I say, and you know, the ridiculous situation was the fact that if I would have doubled their wages and given them an extra 10 years of life, at least 8 to 10 of them would have voted against it on principle. It was me, because I'd had to expose them for what they've done in the past.
I've just got to add something here from my... I just thought about it. You know, each year I interview all the MHKs, or try to get their report on the year. I have not been successful this year in getting a lot of them coming from the cameras.
That.
Why don't they want to talk to me, the media, and anybody else? What's going on?
Well, you know how it is. I lost 18 years worth of ministerial appointment. I got sacked twice off the Department of Home Affairs department for doing the right thing.
I just can't stand why they don't want to do an interview with me.
Well, it's easy, isn't it? If they don't, what they try and do is they try and fill them gob full of gold, fan their eagles so they got a picture of their bum, or they're lazy or stupid. And if they're lazy or stupid, they'll never be exposed. And what you've got to get away is from your dishonest one-party state by patronage.
Okay. Any chance of you return to any sort of politics?
Then? Well, I do. I go to the branch meetings at Southern for Van.
Yeah.
I go to the ones at the first Wednesday a month down in Port Erin. I'd like to do an interview about that sometime.
Yeah, we'll do one.
You know, as far as that's concerned.
Should we be worried? Just leave it with this one. Should we be worried about the way the Isle of Man's going at the minute, as it stands? Do you see
the problem with the Isle of Man is we've got to accept that the one thing that I was the antichrist to the farming community. I used to tell them regular 4 legs in a woolly coat, pampered, 2 legs and no coat, ignored by this court. The reality is, the one thing I will say about the farming community is the fact that you don't leave debt for the next generation. This debt is a prison for future generations. We need to make hard decisions, but the hard decisions should not be on the weak, the poor and sick in our society, but on the fat cats who are making a good living on the island. We also need to bring about effective and efficient government, and that means things that happen to affect their personal interests. And I'm afraid at the moment, with no real opposition, there isn't that opportunity.